I will start with why Essence, and then give you a little presentation of Essence in a few words. We will later give a demo, and most of the things that are details will come out of that demo. So what is the problem we are trying to solve? There are many things. The most obvious, and actually what triggered me to start working on this initiative, the Essence, it's actually 15 years ago, 17 years ago, we started that work. It was I was at an XP conference in New Orleans and talked about how to deal with methods in the future. And but there are many other problems Essence solved than what I talk about right now. We have been at the methods war for 50 years, basically from the beginning. And it has always showed up the same way, that we have different camps, different methods are popular, and they more or less fight one another. There are sects around these different methods. Sects, it's almost a religious war, more than it's a marketing war, normal sales war. Because we have these sect-like groups of people that become very familiar with one method, think it's fantastic, and then ignore the others. We have practice locked into method prisons. That means that a practice described in one method cannot easily be reused in another method. It has to be redescribed. And that means that, of course, the original author is his importance is diminished, and people who write rewrite. They don't only rewrite; they also improve. The original author usually don't think that is an improvement. So we have these fights. Instead of collaborating, the top people in the world of methods, they are trying to stay away from one another. And method is controlled by gurus, one or two. I was a guru myself at the time. Rational Unified Process was the top method in, if you go back 20 years. All big companies used it, all big consulting organizations used it, had to use it to get business. And we have a similar situation today with at least one of the most popular methods. That is, I felt that was ridiculous. I felt we need to do something. And instead of basically creating yet another method 20 years ago, which we were on a path to, I decided to try to change it fundamentally. Methods have no common ground. They don't even share the most elemental terminology. Some terms have different meanings in different methods, and in some cases there are the same term has different meanings. So we have and there is many differences. The whole structure of a method is different. So it's very hard to, for instance, compare methods. And methods are only theory, meaning you can learn it, you study it, you get a lot of training. Usually the different method frameworks have built up great training, but when it comes to doing, the step over from learning to doing is a problem. There is basically no other support than consultants. And unfortunately, we don't have so many good consultants. And the consultants should deal with other things than just the elementary stuff. So I call this nowadays the craziest thing with methods and framework. Crazy is a word I never used before, but I've got to a level where I feel I have to be more clear. This is totally unacceptable. And many people have agreed with me. I have written a number of articles, and thousands of people have reacted to these articles. We have, for instance, one of the most fabulous one is done by Comic Agile, which have made a picture of a methods war. It has got thousands of reactions and very good comments. It's clear something that people react to. Here we have, in this picture, we have Scrum, less, safe, Kanban, and fast. And if you want to read a little bit more about that, there is a link here you can go to, and you will see a lot of activities going on there. So the golden solution for all these many of these crazy things is a widely adopted common ground. If we get a widely adopted common ground, it completely eliminates, more or less eliminates, I should say, these crazy things. And it solves a lot of other problems. The methods war, practices become first-class citizens. People select the practice they want to have. They exist in an ecosystem, and you have practice from basically any method. The methods won't be branded anymore. They are not so important. They are just compositions of practices. The methods prisons, yeah, it disappears because they are, all the practice will be available in an ecosystem. You select the ones you want to have, compose them, and you get your method. We don't need methodology salespeople. Practice expert will come back and be important. That is what it should be. And it's not only theory. We will get put methods into practices. So a common ground is what we need. Today, we have no common ground, as I said. These different methods we share a lot, but it's hidden. It seems as if only the alphabet is the same. It's difficult to compare. It's different for people to move from between different teams if we use different set of practices. To mix and match practices is extremely hard to do, and there are lots of other things. If you have a common ground, they share a lot, and it's not hidden, it's transparent. It will be easy to compare methods, move between teams is no problem anymore because there is a lot we still share. You mix and match practices and many more things. A common ground, a platform on which all methods can stand. Essence standard is such a common ground. So what is essence in just a few words? Yeah, it's like the elephant parable. We look at it from different perspectives. It's a kernel, it's a learning aid, it's a language, it's lots of practice, it's a thinking framework, it's some cards and card games. It's a lot, and you see different things depending on where you are. I have to make a disclaimer. It's not yet another method. It makes any method or framework better. As Jeff Sutherland has said so many times in blogs and in presentations and in panels, concretely, it is like a specification to reuse when describing a method or a framework. So when you describe a method, you have something to stand on that is a standard that has been reviewed by hundreds of professionals and got so far, so it's become a standard. A good standard means there is basically nothing controversial. No one has anything to say that this is doesn't work, or this is not what I think. Once people have put an effort to understand it, they think this makes sense, and have very little, basically we have not heard any critique against its content. So for the first time in our 60+ years history, we have got a common ground. We got that in 2014. But the common ground is not enough. It's like an operating system with no applications built on top of it. You have nothing to use really as a user. So the common ground needs to get practices built on top of it, described on top of it, and put in an ecosystem to really give value. So we have there are two different aspects. It's a technical aspect of it. It recognizes that every method, framework, or whatever is just a composition of practices. And the practice is a mini method. For instance, user stories, test-driven design, component-based development, or self-organizing teams. It has a language and it has a kernel, and I'll soon talk about them. And the rest you will see. It focuses on the essential and make it easy to learn, and it uses poker-sized cards. The human aspect of it, it's a thinking framework, stimulating conversation about important subjects within a team. So it's full of things to talk about, and it empowers the team, it engages the team to, and not only the top technical guy will dominate, everybody will be part of it because there is a lot to discuss and agree on. And we have games. So if we talk about what Essence is from a technical point of view, it is a language which is visual, it's very small, and yes, it's a visual, it's very simple, intuitive. You learn it in an hour or something like that. And the kernel includes the essential things to work with, essential things to do, and essential competence. So all is essential, and since it's a standard, it's non-controversial. If you want to learn more, there is a book which is titled The Essentials of Modern Software Engineering. It is also translated to several languages. One is Japanese. But there is also a link on LinkedIn, an article I've written on LinkedIn that talks about learning more about Essence, learn more about Essence. And there are lots of articles, videos, and anything you want to learn. By the way, I can also recommend the 23rd of November, we have a course about how to make, it's titled Better Scrum Through Essence. In this course, people will really understand the basics of Essence. It's not only about Scrum. Basically, any practice become better, as Jeff Sutherland has said about Scrum. And many others are working on essentializing their practices and methods. So take a look at this Better Scrum Through Essence. Maybe we can give a link. I will give a link later in the chat window, so please look there. So what does it mean to essentialize a method or practice? Well, if you look at the Scrum Guide, it includes almost 7,000 words of sage advice. But it's still words. It's really not easy to put into real practice. If we essentialize that, we get cards. In this case, 21 cards that make it very active, basically activate the Scrum guide, and it's done and approved by the father, one of the fathers of the Scrum, namely Jeff Sutherland. It's 21 cards, and the cards are placeholders for conversations. So here we have the cards. This is actually not the latest version, but actually which exists too and can be downloaded. It talks about the principles. They have principles, roles, things to do, things to work with. And there are two different kinds of things to work with different roles that we will discuss in the demo soon. So practices use Essence as a platform. Here we have Scrum Essentials, 21 cards, but we also have many other practices like this: user story, use case 2.0, Kanban, tested and developed DevOps, and many, many more. You can read an article published in ACMQ about the Scrum Essentials cards and experience of Scrum teams improving the Essence. It's written by Jeff Sutherland, and I have been a co-author together with Brian Kerr from my company. One of the unique things about Essence is that it's actionable. Essence is a multidimensional thinking framework. Here you see 7 dimensions. You have to think about the stakeholders and progress their involvement in the work, in a project or endeavor. There is always an opportunity. That's why you do something. You progress the requirements, the knowledge about what you want to build until you have fulfilled something that is useful for clients. You progress the software system from just having architecture till having executable working code, and so on. There is work to be done. There is a team, but from the beginning, the team dimension, you may only have money to buy a team. And then as you progress, you have the team members that actually collaborate. So they move from state to state, all these. And the way of working is how the team works. And that will also mature over time. So that is, if you look at it in the iteration one, you may be in states like this, state 2 for stakeholder and opportunity. And then you move on. In a later iteration, you have seen these things be in later states. You can see that it's a new wave. We call it a wave. And for instance, if you take opportunity, it has one card with a checklist. There are lots of checklists in Essence. These checklists are different from what you have seen maybe in the past. They are not checking if you have produced a document or if you have performed an activity. They are answers to question, what outcome, real outcome have you got? So they are agnostic to any particular method. So you look at every state change, and it's a placeholder again for conversation. It's guided by these cards, and there are many such for different cards for activities, competencies, etc. So now let's get to the fun part of it. Essence is used a lot for gameplay. Here's one improving retrospectives that is part of a Scrum guide or Scrum. You have a big sheet of paper. On the x-axis, you have 3 phases. You're doing very well, green. You're doing very bad, that's red. And then something in the middle. And then you have, on the y-axis down, you have what is very important, but less important, that what's irrelevant. You put the cards in one of the boxes here, things that you do very well and that's important. And then you have things you do that are important, but you don't do well at all. So you put out the cards like that, and then you find the cards in one box that you need to do actions on. So you list the actions. This is a game where engage with the whole team and also make it clear where you need to do something better as you move on. I never believed in this. If you go back 15 years, I thought games doesn't belong to serious software development. But seeing the really engagement that people get. Here I stood in front of 30 Scrum Masters, and they all were very quiet in China. People don't speak and don't ask questions in China. But I mean, not generally, I mean in these meetings. And they were very quiet. But then we played cards to the right, and everyone was engaged and asked questions, discussed, and used the card to play games. So we have many games. Here is just an example. We have kernel games and we have practice-specific games. And for different phases in the learning cycle and the doing cycle. So, and all these games help you progress the work. They are serious games, but also very engaging and help us to do what we want to do. Essence provide live guidance, meaning, and the team is proactively guided on where we are now, what they should consider doing next, and how they might do it. You create to-do lists, as you will see soon, and live guidance go through these 2 cycles, the learning cycle and the delivery cycle. In the delivery cycle, we have already a lot of tools, instance management tools like Jira, GitLab, and so on. And they are very good in the, at least in the do, and they are limited in the plan and check, but there is support. They don't help with the learning cycle. So we have developed a tool, we call it TeamSpace, and that's what we are going to demo soon. There is nothing similar as we know in the marketplace, so that's why we feel it's important to talk about it. It supports very well the learning cycle, and it provides input to tools like Jira. So it supports a part of the plan, do, and check cycle, but only, they don't compete with Jira, for instance. They are integrated, as we'll see. So now it's time for Graham to show us what a tool can do.
Thank you, Ivan.
Should I stop sharing, maybe?
Yeah, I think my sharing will stop your sharing. So, hi everyone, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, well, hi everyone. I'm Graham Marsh from Ivar Jakobsen International. I've been in the company since it began, 17 years. So I'm in a pretty good position, I think, to have witnessed really all of the development of the Essence technology over the years, initially to achieve the standard, but since then really to put in place assets that teams, individuals, organizations use to help them develop software better, faster, cheaper, happier. That's what we've been up to. And as Ivar said, we've been using sort of poker-sized cards. We've been developing serious games. We've been using simulations, even publishing online our own practices in our practice library. But the latest thing I wanted to show you today, really, is our latest incarnation of all of those assets. Really, is an application that helps teams sort of close the gap between the books that often sort of end up on the shelf and remain dusty, and what the team actually does day to day as they develop work with their endeavours. And the screen you see in front of you is the home screen of something we call Essence in Practice Teamspace. Now this is available as software as a service or an on-premise install, because clearly a lot of organizations are quite protective of their sort of practice IP, and we haven't made a big song and dance of the screen. We've kept it quite bland, because the idea here is that if this is in use within an organization, it is branded in line with that organization, with the colors, graphics and icons of that organization. And effectively, we consider it to be the sort of the practice or method epicenter for that organization. So it's where engineers in that organization go to look at ways of working, and for the first time, really, we think, actually interact with the practice guidance that they're using. So far in this instance of the application, I've just loaded in some practices. You'll see that they're to do with Scrum and user stories. We've selected those because they are common and a lot of organizations use them. So hopefully when I start moving through some of this material, it will look quite familiar. And it's important to say that, as Ivar said before, with the common ground, what we don't want really to do is to develop hundreds of practices ourselves. We want the industry inventors of that IP basically to render it using the Essence language, and that's what Ivar was mentioning there, called essentialization. So the stuff I'm going to show you on Scrum in a minute really was co-developed with Jeff Sutherland. That's one of the co-inventors of Scrum. And that's our model. We want to be encouraging the industry inventors to render their practices using this language. So for the first time, really, teams will be able to mix and match those practices together. So I've logged into the tool here. It knows who I am, top right. First thing I wanted to drill down through, though, is the kernel. Ivar mentioned that. So if I drill down through the kernel here, you will see we'll very quickly get to something we call the element map, and you will see in the middle here we have the key things to work with, those dimensions that Ivar was talking about. So we all know if you don't involve your stakeholders in your endeavor, then there be dragons waiting for you. And similarly, it's always a good idea to understand what the opportunity is, why you're actually developing this. We have the requirements. Our stakeholders will help us understand our requirements. And here we have the system, the thing that it is that we are in the business of creating. Underneath down here, we have the work that we're going to do that has to be initiated and put under control and worked. We have the way of working, so the practices we're actually going to use. And of course, fundamentally importantly, we have the team. So the idea of these dimensions, and they're called in the Essence language, they're called alphas. So the most critical things to work with is that they are completely method agnostic. So the idea is that if you throw these dimensions at a team to encourage a discussion, the use of just plain language will enable them to discuss, as you all said, placeholders for conversation around these dimensions. They don't need to know any specific knowledge. And the colors mean something. That's part of the language as well. We've got 3 areas here. The green is the customer area of concern. The yellow is the solution area of concern, and the blue is the endeavor itself, the work to do the actual endeavor. And you'll see there's quite a large life cycle going on here. So it's from the moment the opportunity gets identified right down to when the system 10, 20 years in some cases later gets retired. So there's a very long sort of life cycle here. But there are techniques, and I can hopefully show you some of those in a minute, whereby you can constrain and refine down to the aspects of work that a particular team might be doing. So they're the key things to work with. And if I go up here, there's another key part of the kernel, which is more the active part, the activity spaces. So if I turn those on here, we'll see, in addition to these things that we have to work with, we have areas in which we have to work. So whether you know it or not, whether you like it or not, you're going to be doing work in these indisputable areas. So exploring the possibilities, ensuring stakeholder satisfaction, understanding your requirements, implementing your system, preparing to do your work and coordinating your activities. So they're the 2 fundamental key aspects. So the things that we work with and the spaces in which we have activities. Interesting to note at the moment, there's no activities in here. And I'll show you when we start adding in a practice in a minute, we can pull in some Scrum. We'll see what happens. The 3rd key element of the kernel here are these things here called competencies. So they're similar to skills, very different, but it's more to do with the competence that you need to undertake these activities to work with these things you need to cover off here. And they've all got a number of levels. So if I click on this one, stakeholder representation, you'll see that there are different levels, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Assists, you can apply it, you've mastered it, you can adapt it, and you can innovate. And the idea is that those levels are the same in each of those competencies. The clever thing is, when we start looking at a practice in a second, the practices, they know which bits of this model they help you progress, which is great because it means for the first time you can mix and match. It also knows, the practices also know which levels of competence you need to enact the particular practice. So now, if I go in and add in a practice, and I pull in Scrum, you'll hopefully immediately see what happens. It starts adding in the activities that you would expect to see in Scrum. So in my understand the requirements activity space, I can see product backlog refinement, and then in coordination of activities, I can see sprint planning, daily scrums, sprint retrospectives, and so on. And it started to add in some other elements here. So under my requirements, in Scrum land, it talks about product backlog. This little icon here, again, part of the Essence language, that is a work product. And then we have something here, which is a refinement on the requirement of product backlog item. And the idea with the system is that as I select things here in the element map, it opens up areas here and gives me a descriptive card here about the thing I've added in. Okay. So if I go and add another practice in now, let's add another one in. Let's go add in some user stories. You will see again, we start to get more of the activities brought in. So we've got some finding user stories now, preparing user stories, and so on. Okay, so I think that's, I mean, for me, when I started working with this, I thought this was fabulous, because when I started as a software engineer, you know, you start on a project when you're very inexperienced, and one of the sort of big unanswered questions for me was always, well, where does my work fit into the bigger picture? And this, for the first time, kind of gives you a map of the entire territory that you've got to cover off as a team. And as you add in practices, it can actually help you understand which bits you've actually got coverage for, but importantly, which bits you're completely bearing, and you still have no coverage in terms of advice anyway. And the good thing about this really is, from the actual agile mindset, really adapting and letting the team choose which way they want to work. This provides, even without any practices, a really good kind of stable base of understanding where we need to get, what we're doing and what we need to do next. So this is a team tool. So I can add this now to a team room, and I can give it a name. Let's call it eBars team, and I can save this. And then fundamentally, it becomes the area where the team works. It tracks its progress, it understands its way of working, and basically it becomes the information radiator for the team. That's the idea. And I can invite team members here, I can copy people links, and the whole team can live and work inside the tool to understand where they're going and what they're doing. I'm going to switch now to a different team room, to a demo team here, and in here I've loaded in the Scrum practice, and I'll start going in a bit more detail now. So if I were to jump into product backlog refinement here on my element map, it starts showing me the things that the activity of product backlog refinement help me achieve. So it contributes to getting my requirements to bounded or coherent, helps me achieve an ordered product backlog, and get my product backlog items to ready. Interesting though, as I selected on product backlog refinement here, you'll see this card opened up, and it's got a few areas here on this information card. So there's a little bit of information here about what the product backlog refinement is about, but interestingly, what state does my endeavor need to be in really before I start? So it tells me that my opportunity really needs to be at solution needed, and I need to have my requirements conceived. It shows me the competencies that I need really to properly enact this activity. So I need level 3 in stakeholder representation, 2 in leadership, and I need just the basic levels in the other competencies. It shows me what I need to, what this activity achieves and contributes to, and the associated roles involved with it. If we look a little bit more detail at this starting state here, we'll start to see the power of the checklist and how teams can use this to actually monitor their progress. So it tells me here, very basic English here, what it means to be conceived. So it says, okay, the stakeholders agree the system is to be produced. Okay, as a team, we're happy with that. It says funding stakeholders are identified, and we might be able to say, yes, absolutely fine. We're happy with that, and that our opportunity is clear. And as you see, as I start checking these checklists off, it starts giving me a visual sort of indicator of where I've got to. This one, however, users identified. Say, oh, I'm not sure. As a team, I'm not sure that we actually know who the users are. So I might want to do something about that. So the tool allows us to create another a little to-do here, and this to-do is all about getting this state achieved, getting our requirements to conceived. So I can jump down into this little WYSIWYG editor here, and I can create a new check, and it might be something like run user identification workshop, something like that. And so you might create a to-do around that. I'm guessing quite a lot of people on the call maybe have using Jira, and Ivar mentioned that earlier in his quick presentation. So we built a bit of a integration in here. So we can say, if we are using Jira, we can say, yep, we want to create an associated Jira issue. So when I create this to do, it switched me from my about to my to do tab. And in here, it's given me a little to do to work here, get our solution requirements to conceived, where we're going to run our user identification workshop. Because we checked to create a Jira issue, it's created us a little link here, so we can navigate that link and we can navigate over to Jira, where the team can break down that task. The team can self-organize. They can work the task in their normal way. And the idea is that at the end, when we've got that task done, we can mark that off there, and then we'll get a link back here into TeamSpace, so we can complete the round trip, and we see that our task is done in Jira, at which point, yeah, we can happily check off our user's identified state, and we can mark our to-do as closed. And then when we return to our element map, we'll see that we've achieved our conceived state in our requirements. So that's the core idea of the tool. Not only is it a great way of understanding the way of work that you're using, it allows teams the autonomy to select the practices they want to use, but gives them a completely sort of practice method agnostic way of understanding the state, the progress they're making. So that's one key thing. I'm just going to switch over to another instance here of the application to show you something slightly different. This is a different instance or build of the tool. We've got the similar kind of practices in here, but it's been reorganized. It's organized in a different way visually. The key thing is what we can do. So if I just nip back over here a second, or my don't know, I'm trying to move to this tab here, but my the control panel's in the way of my. I'll have to do that later, not to worry. But basically, Eva was talking about serious gameplay. So in this version of our application, there's another tab over here called game boards. So in addition to all of the other things I've just shown you, we can start playing serious games. And the idea is here that we can drag. So we've got our way of working here. We can drag elements onto our canvas, and we can start moving those around and starting to play games. We can add in a game board. So I can pull that in as an image here. I can push that over the top of my canvas, and then I can start playing that game that Ivar mentioned earlier on that he was playing with those Scrum Masters. So we can start arranging our elements, and this is great if you're doing a retrospective. And we can also start creating, improvement actions. Let me just do that. Oops. Improvement 1. Here we go, and then I can start putting, moving that around my board and playing those serious games. In terms of coverage as well, although I've just shown you a couple of practices, our Scrum user stories there, we've got quite a library now building up of other things that we've developed and worked with partners on. So we've got pretty much coverage on most of the key sort of team level and some scaling practices here. And the idea is, as we work with clients, this technology allows them to publish their own practice assets. We have another tool called Essence in Practice Workbench, which is where all of this material was developed. And the idea is that organizations can create their own collections of practices. They can make them available to their teams, or teams can select from practices they want to use. So that was my key demo, Yvonne. So can I hand it back to you now?
Absolutely. So how do I now?
I think I will stop sharing, and I believe now you can start again.
Okay. All right. Yeah, thank you, Graham. I've seen this demo a couple of times, and I still have things to learn. So we are getting to the end of this presentation. I would like to say a few words about where our vision, and we are already past several stations on that path to the vision. But imagine you had all the best minds working for you. Today, they don't work together. They are in different silos, different methods, and or frameworks. Instead of relying on just one or two or more frameworks, you have all relevant frameworks in your hands. And you have all the practice your teams want or need, and they are continuously updated by their founders and the community using them. That doesn't happen at all today. You don't see more than one method at a time. You cannot, or framework for that matter. You don't get the community to improve it. It's done by the owner of a framework. Your teams and teams of teams get the tools so they can, dependent on competencies, preferences, select the practice they need and compose them into a method that works for them. You know, you have teams that are very competent. They may not need so much practices. They know how to work. But if we scale up in a large organization, that doesn't hold. But in a small team, that may be. But they still use the essence because it helps you, essence kernel. They help you to identify the thing to really care about and don't miss it. And your teams can explore and learn the essentials of every practice we use through gameplay, by being engaged and motivated and not by traditional study. And your team members get support, not just when learning, but also when doing. I call this the Achilles heel of method adoption. There is a gap between learning and doing. And as you saw from a demo, I hope you saw it, is that we breach that gap. Imagine you have an ecosystem where you have all the interesting practices in the world. I just show you a demo idea here. You have SAFE here, your disciplined agile delivery, your nexus, and you have your existing practice. A team select what they need and want to have. So the red things are things that the team have selected. And you see here that this hexagon represents a practice, each one of them. And underneath them is the kernel. The kernel is at the bottom layer of a presentation of your method or these methods. So they select what they think they need, they ignore the rest, and they have a method with including the practices that they want to and need. And this is not only on the team level, this can be on teams of teams, or for an organization. You create an ecosystem for the organization where they can pick and choose. And of course, Essence is useful not only on the team level, but also on any level in the organization. Actually, it has been used up to the CEO level of a very big company. So let's go to the final here. What's going on around the world? There are more than, on the academic side, there are more than 10 universities are already teaching, using Essence in teaching full semester classes on software engineering. Pekka Abrahamsson in Finland has used it for over 400 students in one class. And he says, my software engineering education in the future will be driven by Essence. There is a forum, Essence Education Forum, with more than 60 university professors is formed to promote Essence. This forum is led by three people, one professor and one doctor, two professors and one doctor. Stefan Malich is one of the leaders of it, and this is really active in working with promoting things for using Essence. Hapag-Lloyd is the latest user of Essence to build an ecosystem of practices. And they are, from this little quote, they are very pleased with what they have done, and they are continuing building. Many methodologists have adopted Essence. Jeff Sutherland has expressed in many different situations that more than 50% of Scrum implementations fail to deliver. And he thinks Essence is the key to success for Scrum. But it's not only him. Tom Gill is supporting Essence, has donated it. His work, P-Language, for essentialization, and he will participate in the work. The Spotify model has been is being essentialized, and Stefan Malich again has done much of the essentialization together with one of the founders of the Spotify model, Joachim Sundin. We have Scott Ambler has basically done it for Disciplined Agile, done it for some practices. It's just that his Disciplined Agile has so many practices. He has mentioned 700 to me, and we don't have that ecosystem yet. But so he says, I can't get enough. We are working on that. We are working on it in architecture, with architecture practices, and I cannot mention many of them because it's not yet achieved result, but we are getting more and more of the key people to adopt Essence. So I think this was what we wanted to say. But yeah, welcome to the future. It's here today. Let's now turn to Nabil, and we see what questions you have.
First of all, thank you so much for the fantastic presentation, Ivar and Graham. Guys, please join me to unmute and give a round of applause for the lovely presentation. Very exciting. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Usually at in-person events, it's a lot easier to do this, but yeah. Okay, we've had a few questions in the chat. So what I'll do is I'll just choose a few people to ask their questions. So Arjun, you have a question. Would you like to unmute and ask it? If not, I can read it out for you. I'll give you a moment, Arjun. Okay, I can read it out. It's an interesting one. So Arjun asks, the Essence framework is open standard. What about all these practices that are essentialized? So I guess he's asking if the practices are open standard as well.
So there are many people essentializing practices around the world. We have essentialized about 100 practices and published 50 of them. Most of them will be freely available. And the only ones that we won't be freely available are if the inventor of them has special requirements how we treat them. We are not dictating particular ways of working with practices and buying and selling, but many of them, for instance, Scrum practice, are freely available as it is today.
Great to hear. Thank you so much. Jeff Hallett, would you like to unmute and ask your question, sir?
Sure, I can. So thanks a lot for the presentation. It was great. I'm kind of in my head abstracting essence as kind of a way, as a modeling language for the architecture of methods is kind of how my brain is going with this. So it leads me to wonder that in any architecture, how well the components interoperate depends on their interfaces and how well the interfaces line up. So I'm wondering how essence might help me if I'm selecting practices a la carte, make sure that my inputs and outputs and so on are lining up correctly, so my resulting composite method doesn't have holes or gaps in it.
So first of all, practices are not components. They don't have interface like components. Frankly speaking, practices are to a method what use cases are to a system. So they are basically overlapping to some extent, and they touch the same elements in some cases. In some cases, the elements are actually have different names, and so you need to merge them. So basically, there is a merge going on, and that merge is supported by the language. So there needs to be someone that semi-automatically merge, but get a lot of help in the merge operations. So you can take practices that are developed with different terminology and compose them by getting some directives from someone who understands how things are related. But that's a very small piece of work, but has to be done by someone competent.
Thank you so much for that question and answer. Great one. Alexis, you've patiently had your hand up in Zoom. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Hi, Nabil. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thanks. Great webinar again, Nabil. You always produce the goods. Ivar, Graham, it's been great. I've listened to a couple of these from you guys. But Ivar, maybe a question to you that kind of piqued my interest when you were discussing doing this or taking this to tertiary kind of education institutes. I found with our company, we do a lot of work with graduates, bringing graduates into the company to grow our R&D team. We want to build from the bottom up, and most of the time I find that when we bring them in, they know a lot of technical stuff that they've been taught at university, but the one thing that doesn't really get covered is the stuff around frameworks and process and what it takes to deliver software. And you mentioned that you were taking Essence into these kind of institutes, and I was just kind of wondering how big are you going to go with that? How are you going to scale that? Is it? I mean, there's hundreds of thousands of tertiary education institutes around the world. I'm just wondering how serious you guys are about that, because I think it's something that's seriously needed, kind of in the software development space these days. Thanks.
Yeah, yes. The teaching of software engineering is done very ad hoc. Different people have different approaches. And usually the most common way is that people are taught a simple.
Accept or reject the meeting.
Sorry. The use common way is that people are taught a very simple process that is very code-centric. And when they let their teams go away with a task and they have to develop some software. But they don't really teach them the basics, the elementary, and with some depth. Very little systematic, very little, let's call it theory. And that is where Essence provides a huge difference to what people do. It helps you to get a systematic way of thinking about all the things you do when you develop software. We can teach first-year students software engineering. They just need to have a little basic knowledge about computer science concepts like programming language and different tools you use in the low level of a development. But really is important. But all the other things are not generally taught. And that is what you can do with Essence. So we wrote this book, The Essentials of Modern Software Engineering, with a purpose of being able to teach it to first-year students at university. And that is already used at some universities.
So I guess my question is that's great. It's just, are you guys pushing that for different universities around the world, or I'm kind of interested to understand.
Yeah, we have 62 university professors that are engaged. I would say 20 of them are very active. The others are interested in following and want to pick it up. And we have a meeting, by the way, next week. I think it's 21st. In this meeting, there will be many different tasks that people share to promote Essence in the education. And we already have about 10 universities using it seriously.
So if we had universities that we use for the intake of graduates that might be interested in this, would it be possible to maybe pass that information on to you guys to see if you guys can engage with them?
Most welcome. I think we have Stefan Malish here too, who is one of the leaders of this Essence Education Forum.
Okay, well, that sounds great. I mean, if there's some way I could contact you.
Just send me an email.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Ivo. Much appreciated.
Thanks.
Motion detected at the front door.
Awesome. Motion detected at the front door as well, I heard, Alexis, so look out for that.
Yeah, no, don't worry. It goes off all the time.
That's great. Awesome discussion. And yeah, the Essence Education Forum, check it out and ask Stefan and email Eva. It's a great initiative. Henrique, I still noticed that you had a question in the chat earlier. Would you like to unmute and ask?
Yes. I've been around since actually the Objectory days in Stockholm that Eva was the brainchild of, and then it moved on to Unified Process that in the beginning was quite a nice process, but it grew and grew and grew and got more and more heavy and collapsed under its own weight. And I can see the same thing happening with other methodologies, I'm safe to say. And I'm just wondering, if you look at all the plugins you've been developing, if you can't risk the same thing with your tool, that you get so much to choose from, then you all of a sudden get this, you can't choose anything because it's too much, too overwhelming. And also when you look at the elements page, isn't there a risk that it can get really crowded and busy, so it's difficult to figure out where you are and how to get a grip of it? I think there's two questions in one, actually.
Yeah, I mean, start with a letter and I will see if I remember you first. Yes, so of course the tool needs to support that you can hide things and only see what you are asking for. So you have a model. under the whole model, you see views of, and views that you're interested in. So you won't see everything. That would be, if you have composed, let's say, 10 methods, 10 practices, it can be quite messy. So then you hide. So, and your first question, please repeat a few words I remember.
It's that both unified process and safe are getting larger and larger and more difficult to understand and get a grip of for newcomers. And there's a risk it'll collapse under its own weight. And if you look at all the things that you've been developing with your customers, you're getting more and more of these. How will you avoid falling into the same trap? So it's still easy to find the things you need and not get confused and not being able to choose from all the options you have.
Yes. Of course, there needs to be a way to see what you want to see. And ability to limit, that's also again to views of a big model. So the tool will support that kind of thing. Not today, because we don't have so many practice, but we get up to 1,000 practice. You need to have a way to find your into that that thing. And there will be 1,000 practices.
There will be, and that's what I can see here.
Yeah, absolutely. So the way to do it, there are, I mean, we have done, once upon a time, I truly believed in that we could support developers by using intelligent agents, for instance. And we did a tool that was fabulous. It just came at the wrong time. I'm convinced that we are soon back by supporting this library of things with intelligent tools of different kinds.
I can see a lot.
So-called intelligence.
I was a big fan of your Victory toolkit, and I was almost crying when Rational put it to death.
Me too, but don't let it go there. It's history.
You can see that over.
It's amazing. I heard 10 years after the merge with Rational, I heard people at Microsoft say that the best tool ever developed was the Objectory tool.
Yeah, I agree.
And there were many tools at that time.